In this video, I want to talk a little bit about something you will run into if you spin your own yarns to make your own items, but especially socks. Now, I'm kind of determined to use American-raised wool to make socks for veterans. So I bought some Rambouillet. I have about 15 years experience with spinning and carding and processing wool and cotton, but I haven't done it in about 5 years, simply because, well, I've had it around, but I just haven't been doing it on a serious level in about 5 years. So when this came up where the yarn I had purchased for the socks to go with the quilt sets was all from China, and I had to spin my own yarn, I'm using Rambouillet, which is a sheep breed that is the most common sheep in America. It's really an American sheep in that sense. But I also just ordered some Navajo churro, which is one of my favorite wools to work with. There's Dexter, Corriedale, Merino. Other than the Navajo churro, those are all different wools that are beige or white for the most part, and fairly easy to spin and clean. But I'm working with Rambouillet, which is out of the Corriedale is probably the easiest if you're just starting. You can buy some Corriedale, and it's got enough stiffness to it where it's easier to spin than, say, Rambouillet or Merino. But here is a ball of yarn of my Rambouillet, and even after all these years of spinning, I always end up with what I call like a thick and a thin yarn. And it depends on whether you're hand carding it or do have a drum carder. But this is an example of it woven on a simple weaving loom. And you can see that there are thinner areas and thicker areas. Now, if I took the time to get out each one of these thicker areas, I would have probably a consistent sock weight yarn. But I actually like the kind of homespun look to a knobbier yarn, so I leave it in there. But what you're going to run into, I have about 8 sock patterns that I've written that are in my Etsy store. So when I went to make these socks, I've been testing things a little bit. I started with a pattern. I happen to know the person that's getting the quilt set that I'm working on. I happen to know who they are. So I'm making a men's pair of socks in a size because I know what size he is. But I also wanted to do it so that if I needed to, I could give them to women veterans. So that led me to thinking about making a ribbed sock that is really a unisex sock, similar to the one in the, I can't think of the name of the book right now, the vintage book that I've talked about before, Columbia Minerva. Similar to the bed sock or heelless sock in there, but I was going to do it a little differently. But what you're going to run into, the pattern I started using is one of my own patterns, and it calls for knitting on size 1 and size 3 needles with a sport weight yarn. And my yarn comes out to be a sport weight. Well, the way I spun these balls of yarn, it comes out to be about a sport weight, but it does have these thicker areas, but those just knit in, and they squish down, so I knew I could use this pattern. Now, I started by doing the upper ribbing here on size 1 needles, and in fact, I started them on Haya steel needles, right here in the size 1, and even though, you know, I'm used to doing this, their tips are fairly small. There are over 70 stitches in this pattern. These are 9-inch needles, And the problem was the wool still, which is an advantage, it has a lanolin feel to it, and it was very slippery on the needles. So then I went to straight needles to do the ribbing, size 1 straight needles to do the ribbing, and that worked out wonderfully. And I do have that flat knitted pattern that I've talked about. So, but then I figured when it was time to go to the bigger needles, I decided to use double point. So you can see I've been trying all the different needle types out just to see what I wanted to really do with this pattern. Am I developing a new pattern? Am I using my old pattern? So I had bought a new set of double points, and they're a wonderful set. I believe they are from China, but they're steel double points in 11 sizes. Now, I've been thrilled with them because, a lot of my tools are from China. I can't get away from that completely. I just didn't want the actual yarn wool to be from China when it went to veterans. The problem with these are, I grabbed the size, the set of 11, their sizes don't really correlate to like the boy Baileen's or the high, or even the Hayahayas, and they all go by the millimeters. So I ended up, I thought I was using a 5. These are actually a 6. So now I'm at the point where I'm probably going to redo this. Now, the one reason I can finish this sock, and I can make the other sock the way it is, and with the wool, once I wash them, it's all going to pull together anyway. So I can still do it this way. But what I'm going to do is probably pull it out, start over again, and go by my pattern, which I started with, which is size 1 and size 3 circular needles. Now, whether I use double points or whether I can use Hayahayas, they make a 1 and a 3 and a 9-inch, or I can use the Hayahaya size 1 in bamboo, which will make it a little easier to handle and less slippery with this wool, and then switch to the Baleen 2 size 3s. So my point is, when you spin your own yarn, you're going to get variations in the yarn. Commercial yarns are very consistent as far as weight, and depending on your spinning, on how long you've been spinning, on how your day goes when you're spinning, and specifically whether you're hand carding or whether you have a drum carder or whether you're working from a roving, that'll change your spinning. If you're using a spindle, that'll change your spinning. So, of course, with all spinning, the goal is to get a consistent yarn, but, I've been doing it for years, and this is about how my yarn comes out, no matter how many of those factors are affecting it. So, my yarn is really good for 1s and 3s, maybe 2s and 4s, as far as needle size goes. But the average person wouldn't say there was much wrong with this. But, like I said, if you're spinning your own yarn and you have a pattern, it's best to stick to the pattern. Now, the main reason is, I think I just said these ended up, I thought they were a 4, they're a size 6. And that means, even with this type of a wool, it's going to change the size, and the socks are going to be big. If these were going to, say, a homeless shelter, and they were the Columbia Minerva bed sock pattern, then it wouldn't really matter because you could just give all different sizes. But in this case, I do know who they're going to, and I don't really want to give a baggy sock. So it's just something that you need to think about actually when you're buying the wool. if you're going to buy raw wool, you need to think about the texture, not just the color, the ease of spinning, the method you're going to use to spin, and then how you expect your yarn to come out. And from that point, you need to be aiming toward your pattern. So because I write patterns, I can be a little free thinking with this, and I can say, oh, well, I'll figure it out as I go along, which I can do, which I've been doing. And yet what I'm finding is I've already gone through all of this when I wrote the pattern, and just stick to the pattern and everything will come out better. So when you spin your wool, you really want to be targeting a pattern and a needle size and a type of needle. Because let's say I was, I don't know, I went somewhere and I only had my Hayas with me. Now these are the bamboo ones, which would be a little less slippery, but they have very short needle tips. So if I pull this out and I use these to make the pattern, that size 1 ribbing is going to be a little bit, I'm going to have to manage the stitches. The needle is very short. It's only 9 inches, and there are over 70 stitches. So it's going to be, I'm going to have to concentrate when I'm doing it so I don't lose stitches, so I don't have stitches slide off the needle. But then when I get to the 3s, I'll still be doing that with a 9-inch length needle, but not quite as meticulously. So my point is that when you're spinning your own yarn, you have to bring in all these factors when you buy the yarn. Otherwise, you're going to end up with wonderful hand-spun yarn that you're not sure what to do with. So, especially if you're just starting out with spinning, you could buy 4 ounces or 4 ounces of yarn, or maybe 6 to make sure that you have enough for a project, a pair of socks. And usually they sell them in 4 ounces. So you would probably end up buying 2 bags, which would be 8 ounces. Start with 4 for a pair of socks, and aim for your pattern. When you're spinning, aim for your needle size and aim for your pattern. Now, when I spun this, I hadn't yet thought about which needles I was going to be using because I have all kinds of needles. And I hadn't even picked out which pattern I was going to use yet. But if I had aimed for a certain pattern and a certain needle size when I was spinning the yarn, I wouldn't be going through this now of saying, oh, wait a minute, do I like it like this, or do I want to do it again? So spinning your own yarn for socks is a wonderful way to make all different kinds of socks. And the Navajo churro that I just ordered, Navajo churro is a heritage breed, and it's really a rug yarn. And that will change. I'm going to maybe use it for a pair of socks. I bought lamb, so lamb fiber, so that's softer than adult Navajo churro fiber. But it's still going to be a rug yarn. And the type of sock I aim that for will end up being more like a slipper sock or a boot sock almost. So it's very fun and it's very exciting to get to know the different types of sheep wool fiber, the different ways of spinning. I have to get a new belt for my charka, but you have charka spinning, spinning wheel spinning, and spindle spinning. And then you have all different types of needles. So the consistent will be the pattern. Now, this also applies to cotton. When I have pharmaceutical cotton, that comes out similarly to this when I spin it. But if I buy a cotton roving, it's going to come out a little bit differently. And cotton is even more slippery than wool as far as spinning, so you tend to get tufts in it unless you are experienced with cotton. Cotton takes some practice because it's very short. Each fiber is like a half an inch long. This fiber is 3 inches long, and that's called the staple length. So there are factors to consider: what yarn to buy, how you're going to spin it, what needles you plan on using for socks specifically if you're doing socks, and what pattern. Aim for the pattern when you're doing all of that: the buying, the planning, and the spinning.